My name is Joshua Sachs. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Natural and Historic Resources for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I work for Governor Ralph Northam. And among the things I do, I help him work on planning to make Virginia more resilient to flooding and climate change and sea level rise and many things like that. So I'm going to chat. My hope is to chat with you a little bit tonight. And I think that we have some elected officials here, some local stakeholders and others, and some friends joining online. I've also been made aware that there was an incident in a school today here in town that I'm sure is weighing heavily on many people's minds and may be pulling people in other directions tonight. And we understand, and certainly our thoughts are with them. So with that, let me press on, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do today. We've sort of already done the welcomes and intros. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is coastal resilience, what we're trying to do. Then we'll get to the fun part where I'm going to ask you some questions, and both people in the room and perhaps those online can write us questions or comments. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps, and that'll be it for the night. There's snacks and things for those who are here in the room, so please make sure you enjoy all of that. So to start with, what do we mean when we say coastal resilience? People sort of now say a lot of coastal resilience, coastal adaptation, a lot of buzzwords. What we mean is we want to make it so that when a storm happens in Virginia, when a storm happens here in Hampton Roads area, that we can get through it as quick as possible and get life back to normal as quickly as possible. It's that simple. And right now we know that that isn't happening, and it's getting harder and harder from what we see happening, as recently as 2 nights ago. So there's different kinds of flooding, and very quickly, I just want to mention in this area, you deal with all the different kinds. So there's tidal flooding that happens when we have full moons and you see the storm drains back up, and there's big puddles that you experience as you drive to work. We call that nuisance flooding. When we combine that with rainfall flooding, which is just the rain coming out of the sky, and tidal flooding, if they hit at the same time, we have double the problems because there's nowhere for the water to go. And then even worse, in a hurricane situation, this area can be hit by huge waves crashing into us. We call that storm surge. And we have to deal with all those kinds of flooding in an area like this that not only is dealing with all of that, but also some of the highest rates of sea level rise and a very high rate of actual sinking of the land. We have a lot to deal with, and that's why Virginia is trying to address some of these things. That's why we're here tonight to talk to all of you. So just to put that in perspective, about 6 million people, or 70% of our population, lives in this coastal area that has all those risks I just showed you. So you can see from the slide, flooding costs a lot of money. I'm sure I don't have to tell that to all of you in the room when our basements flood or we lose days at work. Huge impact on the economy. And like I said a minute ago, we have the highest combined rate of sea level rise and land subsidence happening on the East Coast. So again, really need to start to address these challenges. What's causing it? Climate change, that's the simple answer. But the more we build, the more concrete we put down, the less places we give water to roam, we give water to settle. And we're seeing that more and more in our urban areas. Obviously, it's raining more, and not just more, but it's raining harder and faster. We get these big flashes of rain that happen in 20 minutes instead of a nice spread out, even drip that lasts for 2 hours. And we don't know how to deal with that. I mentioned the sinking land. That's because we're draining our aquifers and the land is sinking and the sea is rising. So let's put that in perspective a little bit. And it's a little bit hard to see, but I've got 2 pictures up here for you. And the first one is what we're looking at now. And the second one is 2060. And, I'm wearing a walking mic, I forgot. So I can go over here and I can show you. When you see these colors start to seep in, the more color you see, that's the more risk that we have, right? This is showing you that how susceptible we are to all these different types of storms. So bottom line here is if you look at 2020 and you look at 2060, you can see sort of it's moving in a lot here. The entire peninsula here gets filled in. Point is, it's going to get worse and worse and worse for us. And that's why we need to start taking steps now, not just to deal with the problems of today, right? We need to deal with those nuisance flooding problems that you deal with on your way home from work. But we also need to make sure that in 2060, we're here, if our kids are here, that they have something to work with. So we need to start to build in the long-term stuff. And we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. So again, same kind of idea, 2 pictures. The more color you get, the worse things are. And that red arrow is approximately where we are here tonight. And what you can see is we're already in an area with a bunch of color where we're getting a lot of flooding. I'm sure you all know that just from driving around. But in 2060, in just 40 years from now, it's going to get a lot worse. I used to think 40 years was a long time, and then I turned 40. So it comes quicker than you think for those who are under 40. So in the next 40 years, in that little bit less than my lifetime, what's going to happen in Virginia is this flooding is going to impact more than 6,300 more people, about 2,500 more buildings, about 1,300 acres more land, just here in Newport News. And now we get to the part where we get to talk a little bit. So I want to ask you some of these things. I know what causes flooding at the macro level. I know how to work with the state to try to create programs that are going to help communities adjust. But as we go and try to develop a plan for how the state is going to allocate its resources to both deal with the short-term and the long-term problems, and we create a new community preparedness fund for flooding, and we do all those things, the real point of these meetings is for us to hear from you. And I stand up here and talk, but my friends here who are helping are going to take notes on whatever is said today, and that's going to get put into our thinking as we develop this master plan and start to allocate state resources. So if you'd be willing to chat with me a little bit, and I've been in rooms where people like to talk, and I've been in rooms where y'all just stare at me and I have to do the talking, but I think we want to start by just asking you what you're seeing and what it looks like here, and what can Richmond or the state government do for you? Does anyone want to share anything with me about that? Or are there any online comments? I felt it coming too.
I was thinking that here, the area that floods the most, of course, is around Salters Creek. And we have been asking for a while to try to find ways. We have plans in place to try to help us with that, because there you get a lot of tidal flooding and storm surge along with the rain. But that area, we're doing some things. Like, for instance, along Salters Creek, what has happened right now is we've gone in and we've put in natural grasses. We purchased property around Salters Creek, trying to reclaim the areas that typically flood. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I'm thinking more can be done. And we have seen some improvements. There are intersections that haven't flooded lately that used to flood every rainstorm. Yeah, we lifted the that.
Yeah.
That, well, and you know, everybody loves to ask the government for money. So that's what I'm asking for today. Because mainly in I know one part of my district, up near Briarfield, Sheila, and that area, it's 2021. And we should not still have those ditches, and the community they walk on that street, but because, you know, almost everything in local government takes at least 20 years to try, you know, designate the funding, be able to get it in certain areas, particularly throughout this whole city. But we were able to get the sidewalks around Heritage. And so now we can just look at that community, which I know it will be costly. I can't even give you a dollar amount, but to be able to continually help us get funding for areas like that, because I just look at it when I'm riding through and think it's 2021 and you have those houses and ditches and no sidewalks. It just seems like that's so primitive, and we should be able to get funding to be able to get the piping that's needed to make it really look like a more established community.
I think we can do some of that. And I have answers for a lot of these things, but I want to let y'all keep going, and I'm going to answer it all at once, if that's okay with you.
Well, and I'm not sure I'm going to be addressing your question, but I'm just going to tell you what's on my mind.
Please.
Because I know I may have to leave early. But with the flooding and with homeowners, low-income homeowners, most of the time they do not have the means to even make the repairs after flooding occurs. And so it seems like there should be some type of relief programs, for them to be able to not have to live in those conditions, because if they're unable to make the necessary repairs, then you have mold, you have all of these other things that contribute to poor health that end up costing even more than the original problem. So, I'm just interested in what kind of relief can be made available to homeowners who are impacted by flooding.
Yep, I agree. Let me ask you another question. What about flood insurance? Do you hear about that a lot too?
I hear too, and I almost said that.
Yeah.
On top of that, a lot of those homes are not in a flood zone. So if you're buying the house or if you own the house, a real estate agent is not going to say that you need to buy flood insurance because of that. So there should be.
It doesn't say it. Right. The person is going to opt out because.
Oh, I understand that. Do people also call and complain that their insurance rates are too high, that they can't meet the rates?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, I would guess. Okay.
Because you know what that does if they get the insurance and if they can't pay cash, flat out cash, it goes into their mortgage. So that means the mortgage is higher because the insurance is so high.
Yep.
Hello, hi. My name is Tiara Mack. I am a college student in the area. I used to attend Hampton University, but now I'm taking a gap year. I would say that what causes the floods is the standing water for sure. I live in equal opportunity housing for the fact that I am a college student. I live in between by the CNU area by Mariners Park. And I just purchased a new car and I paid my tax relief fund. But while we are experiencing during hurricane season, I am one of those people who are actually impacted by the lack of proper sewage systems in the area, because even though I just purchased a new car, after the first Ida situation, I had definitely have like pink chips and stuff. And even though that's covered in flood insurance, I don't think that is the answer, because if the sewage on the building properly drained and the runoff went into the pipes and only stayed in the pipes, then it wouldn't just be a flood insurance issue. Is actually a civic issue. I wouldn't blame the insurance company at all. But I would say the communities most at risk are college students like myself and other young people in the community, because we are fighting for economic independence every day by going to work and wanting those wages to be able to prepare and pay our bills on time. But like, if I'm not feeling protected by the local government and the state, then I'm not really motivated to even continue to pay extra for flood insurance. But I know that Newport News, the 95th district, is definitely underwater. At Hampton University, they definitely told us the highest point on campus was the church. So outside of Hampton's campus, I understand like how the city is built and we're all underwater. But I did want to mention that, especially in the 80th Street to Jefferson, that edge that sits on the edge from Hampton and Newport News, I would say like that area experiences more damage than just flooding, because every time it rains, it does experience blackouts as well. And I didn't know if you guys were aware that the blackouts increases the crime that could potentially happen when blackouts and any other storm weather come through the area. So
thank you for sharing all that with me. One thing we're going to do before the end is you'll see there's these maps here, and we bring these to every time we do one of these meetings. So I hope you'll come and you'll help circle for us the area. So that's one way we make sure we're catching all the spots people are talking about. Yes, sir.
One of the biggest challenges that I think we face right now is that if you look specifically at Newport News in comparison to other areas in the 757, we are probably in the best shape of other cities when it comes to coastal flooding. We have the good fortune of being built on a ridge here, and that's a mixed blessing. The reason I say that is we have limited areas where we have flooding and where we have some significant challenges when it comes to coastal resiliency, much more limited than other areas. Because they are limited, I think they would be fairly affordably fixed and something that we could move forward on pretty quickly if the funds were available. They don't pose the major challenges that some of our sister cities face. As far as assistance from the state, I wish that the state would take some of those things into consideration and be able to fund some of our projects, although they don't have the same scope as some much more expensive projects in the area. I think it would be very important to our city. And if nothing else, it would be able to show proof of concept that we can mitigate floodwaters and then apply those same principles to larger areas once they've been proven here in Newport News.
Thank you. All right. Anybody have anything else they want to add?
But one of the concerns when we talk about flooding, when it comes to environment, the impact it has on the environment, Newport News, especially the downtown area, sits. That's the point. It sits right on the point. We have a HRSD plant there. Of course, all that coal is over there on the other side. The shipyard, all of this stuff impacts. So I've been seeing lately, the very place that we contend has no possibility of flooding is no longer an aberration. It's reality all over the country. So I'm wondering if in fact we have a major storm or something that pushes that water like it did back in Isabel, when it pushed that water up here. And then if it's a ton of rain coming from the other end, this place becomes inundated. What happens to our community so far as the environmental impact is going to have? All of that coal and all of that mess flushed through the community. Now, when it dries up, it's still there. So I'm hoping and praying that we can look at that in a futuristic standpoint, as opposed to what we believe is that we won't be affected by it because we sit high or we sit wherever, you know. So I'm just hoping, especially because in our community, the bottom community, what I'm talking about is an all Black community, basically. And that's the one that's always been left out of the mix. It's, you know, when it comes to putting infrastructure in, when things break, that's when they fix it. So how do we address those concerns in a futuristic standpoint, understanding that this climate change is real? A lot of people, whoever they are, under belief that it's not. And I'm deeply concerned that when I look in Texas and all of these places, what's going to happen here in this beautiful city of ours that sit on the water? Suddenly we sitting under 8 feet of water. Because I'm stunned when I look at the rest of the country and what happens to it, especially down in Texas, Louisiana now. You know, even though we are slightly above sea level, it doesn't seem to mean at all, because if you got 40 inches of rain falling like it did up in New York, and all of a sudden you couldn't go in the tunnels. Nobody ever believed that would happen. And that's my concern, that we have a futuristic approach to this thing, understanding that if we don't get in front of it, we'll be under it.
Can you all living in a new normal, and I think we're still trying to catch up to that. But I think you're right. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and a lot of that is our stormwater system. It's when it rains hard, those spurts. You do have a lot of standing water in the southeast community. You also have a lot of standing water and a lot of flooding in the New Market Creek area because of New Market Creek, and that's impacted by Back River, which is in Hampton. And with all the development that just kind of developed along New Market Creek, you end up with a lot of flooding of homes in that particular area. And some of the homes that are in that area aren't necessarily built right there near the creek, but they're also seeing flooding. You're getting a lot of flooding up in that area also.
When we don't work together, our communities, we can wind up pushing water at each other. And that's why I think also a greater need for state engagement and federal engagement when we're working on that. Miriam, was there a question or two on the online before, or comment before we moved on?
Yeah, there's just one question from Grace, and how do we protect ourselves here?
Hi, can you all hear me?
So what I'm going to do is I want to try to answer a lot of these questions. Okay. And I can only answer them at kind of the big high perspective level. I don't live in this community and I don't know these spots as well as you do. But I want to start a conversation today about how we're going to solve all these problems together over a period of time. So what I'm going to do is share some more information with you, and I'm going to try to address a lot of the things that came up. And then when I'm done, if I missed something or you want to say I did it wrong or whatever, you want to ask again, we'll come back. Does that sound okay to everybody? All right. So these are just a couple more questions about flooding, but I think we've sort of had the flood conversation. Now there's some slides in here, again, that I'm going to just go through real quick, which is anytime I talk about disasters and resilience, I have to give people these sort of reminders that these situations are very, very serious. And when you hear about them, you need to make sure you are listening to your local officials, doing the right things. Oops, I jumped ahead a little bit. If you have to evacuate, follow your evacuation plan. I do not work for disaster management. My job is to help make us prepared for the storm before it happens. And then after the damage is over, to come back in and help us rebuild in a better and stronger way. Like we talked about cars, recently, just a few inches, just a foot of water can move a car. 6 inches of moving water can knock an adult down. So please don't take these things lightly. We talked about flood insurance a little bit. There are computer models online where you can go and you can know your flood risk. And we noted that might not always be accurate, but it's a start. There are community plans. There's a state hurricane plan. So that's sort of what one should know and that I'm required to say about disaster preparedness. Now let's get to the stuff where I'm going to start to answer some of your questions. So Virginia has actually taken some pretty big steps in the past year and a half to try to deal with all of these problems. And the first thing Virginia did is starting January 1, it became a member of something called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It is a program where states reduce carbon emissions from power plants. We're trying to deal with the climate change problem. And they do it by having power companies buy these credits on a market. And from that, revenues are generated. So Virginia is now part of that. And every quarter, there's an auction for power companies to buy these credits, and we get money. And with that money, the General Assembly of Virginia has dedicated the funds to two sources. One of them is for energy efficiency through the Department of Housing Community Development, particularly focused on communities of need. And I don't work on that program, so we're not going to talk about that much tonight. But what I do work on is something called the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. And that is the fund that is designed to help provide funds to address many of the issues that y'all raised as we were talking. So just to give you a sense of scope, we think that fund can be moving somewhere $80 to $100 million a year. Until this year, Virginia had $0 in a fund for flood preparedness like this. So big money. Our first grant round, right? We started Probably in the spring, we put out a grant round. We're going to put out about $16 million in that grant round. Another important thing is that fund has written into the Code of Virginia that 25% needs to go to communities of socioeconomic need, as determined by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. So what we are trying to do is create a fund that's going to solve near-term and long-term problems, and we are going to try to push it to communities of need from the beginning. So right away, that is different from some of the scenarios that some of you raised before. This is sort of the mission statement of the fund. We're going to prioritize projects that help local, state, and federal floodplain management standards. We're going to empower communities to do vulnerability assessments and develop their own plans. So this fund is going to say, everyone, we want to help you not just do projects, but we want to help you figure out a community fund. If you need to hire a floodplain manager, if you need to hire some fancy consultants like Virginia Beach did, whatever that may be, if we can help you build capacity to solve problems and do studies, we're going to do that. And then once we've done that, we'll start paying for projects as well. Projects for low-income communities also are on, have a much more generous match. Projects that are based on what we call green infrastructure. Your idea where you told me that you're moving some homes out of the creek to let nature do its thing, to let the natural floodplain return to its function. Those are our favorite kind of projects. We're going to give those the most money. Projects that work at the community scale and protect a whole community and protect critical resources like the coal plant nearby so it doesn't leach into the community. We're going to incentivize that and give that a better match as well. Then we're going to work on something called the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. And what that's going to be is for the coastal region of Virginia, we are going to develop a plan for how at the state level, we're going to help everybody do this. And while at the community level, there's going to be all sorts of problems you want to fix and need to fix, at the state level, it's our job to try to steer the ship a little bit and help people not just think about the short-term problem, but about that long-term resilience or sustainability that some of you spoke about. So we're developing this plan. It's going to be a big document, but it's going to ultimately have a list of projects, and it's going to say, these are the kinds of projects where we want to invest the most. And down the road, that flood fund I talked to you about that's investing over $100 million a year is going to give money to those projects identified by this master plan sort of first and foremost. So we're making sure that we're doubling down and paying for the things that are state and local priorities. I mentioned this before, but in our master plan, we want to work with the state, with local governments, with people in the communities, and that's why we're doing meetings like this. We want to ensure equity, and I mentioned some of the parts that we've put into law or otherwise to make sure that all communities are getting the money. We want to take a broader view, and by that we mean we want to look not just at now, but at the long term. What's going to happen when we're gone and our kids are here, and make sure that it's, we're doing right by them as well. And last, we want to make sure that there's a way to pay for some of it, because we know that government can always make up plans and put them on a shelf, but until there's money, it's not real. And that's why we're really proud that, we have this money starting to come in. $100 million may sound like a lot. It may sound like not a lot if you've done a lot of these big construction projects, but it's a start, and Virginia's never had anything like it before. So we're really excited about it. Oops, I went too far. So as we continue to lay out this master plan, right, there's ways to follow along with it. Your PDC is really involved, your planning district commission, the Secretary of Natural Resources, my boss, Matt Strickler, convenes regular meetings of an advisory committee. And this is something that's going to go on for years. They're going to keep updating it. They're going to make it better. They're going to get better iterations. They're going to become more sophisticated on the types of projects. And that's where all of you come in, is to make sure that where you're from, the areas that you care about, are always represented. So the first iteration may have some projects for this, for Newport News, and it might not. I don't know. I just don't have the list in front of me. But if it doesn't, all that means is we haven't developed enough good projects yet. So we're going to use capacity building money or other things to help. And in the next version, we'll have more plans for this region. In the next one, we'll have even more plans. And I think in our office, we're big believers in the sentiment that, we can't do anything for a community without that community. You know your community best. So that's why we're doing meetings like this today. And we're trying to tell people about what we're up to. So that in a nutshell is what the state is doing and how we hope to address some of these things. There's also existing state programs like the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. And, for some of our culvert type issues or water management things, we want to make sure we're driving you to those funds as well. And I'm happy to chat with you about any issue that sort of falls in the environment space that we might be able to help with. But I think that gives you an overview of what we're trying to achieve. And I hope it takes into account many of the things that you raised. And with that, I'll pause and say thank you and hear if you have any responses or you want to talk any more about what I just said. Yes, ma'am.
You said 100 million. Is that from HUD?
No, so this is from the proceeds from Reggie, this thing that the state has joined into. And I am guesstimating for you that it'll be about $100 million a year because we got $18 million in the first quarter, right? So 18 times 4 gets me pretty close, and the numbers are going up. So I think it'll be around 100 million, but Oh.
And I have a question.
Yeah, and just go back to the money again, so that 100 million, or let me just say the 16 million, will that be what, statewide or nationwide? People able to apply just in the state or not?
It's a Virginia fund, right?
Virginia.
Created by the Virginia General Assembly, but it is a statewide fund. You're right. So we will use the money to address flooding needs across the Commonwealth. And I'm sorry, did the delegate have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to relate that, but we can go.
Okay.
And so jurisdictions will be eligible to apply?
Eligible applicants for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund are localities, planning district commissions, soil and water conservation districts, and federally recognized Virginia Indian tribes.
Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, so the question is, what is the Commonwealth doing to help schools to be more resilient, especially in school building? For example, there's funding for rebuilding schools like middle school, which needs extra support pilings, the foundation sea level rise, and additional costs of millions of dollars. $dollars to help cover the extra costs of building schools in a flood prone area.
It's a complicated question. The simple answer, I believe, is the Community Flood Preparedness Fund could be used to help a community protect and shore up a critical resource. And I think a school would count as a critical resource. That said, it is a competitive grant program. And as I said before, there are a lot of different things in the scoring criteria. So how it would fare or what the match would be or things like that, I couldn't say off the top of my head. Any other questions or thoughts?
Available now, or will it be after you prepare this plan?
So, and forgive me for making it confusing, there is this fund that exists right now, and you can apply for tomorrow. There's a grant round that's open right now, and it can pay money out. I think we'll make our first awards in just a few weeks. The master plan, which is just a plan, is ongoing, and we hope to have the first version of that completed by the end of the year. And then once that is completed, we will build into the scoring criteria for the fund some extra points for things that are included in the master plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
The question I have you all designated the flood zone areas that are inclusive? Because all the state is not, I mean, mountainous areas are certainly not in a flood zone, but have this organization, or however you all construed it, have you designated what you consider flood zones so that we will know who can apply for these funds?
So a couple things. For the funds, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, one does not need to be in a designated flood zone to apply, right? So let's say a community wants to apply for planning or capacity, right? The whole community doesn't have to be in a flood zone.
Okay.
If you're going to do a project to abate flooding, obviously it's going to be in a place where there's flooding. But we're not so hung up on the zone, because as we've heard from others and as we've seen, you know, flooding can happen even when you're not mapped into a FEMA flood zone. So that's part of the answer. Now, in the master plan, we've hired an engineering firm who's helping us figure this out, and they're doing sophisticated mapping and things. So we know the areas that are going to flood, so we can pick the best projects that are going to work on that. But with regard to funding out of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, anyone who has a need they can demonstrate can apply. And don't sell our friends out west short. There's considerable flooding that happens in the mountain regions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Two more. Now, one of the questions, generally in flood-prone areas, especially impoverished areas, you always hear about getting flood insurance. People can't hardly afford rent or paying their notes. So would some of these funds be available so that the cities or the municipalities could become creative in providing some kind of insurance for those highly prone areas that are affected by floods? Because when I was looking out west, I mean, after a certain point, they said the insurance becomes so expensive you can't afford it. So if you live in one of those areas and nobody is providing some measure of protection for you to help you, then when it floods, you just SOL.
Yep. So I've worked on flood insurance for way too long to recount. And I'll tell you, here's the thing. We want to reduce your flood insurance rate by reducing your flood risk, right? We want to actually reduce your risk. We don't want to just make it cheaper artificially, right? So the way we do that is through these master planning exercises and through these funds. When we take community-wide efforts to make you safer, right? When we, as a community, do some buyouts, or we create a swale for the water to settle, or we build a floodgate that's going to protect a whole bunch of people, or we put up a levee, then those people's flood insurance rates are going to go down for the right reasons, because they're safer. And that's what we want to do. So we want to make money available so people can make communities safer, and that is going to lower your rate. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but while you're
Yeah.
getting to that swing, while you're getting to that level,
Yeah.
what I'm saying, I hope that would be a consideration. You said, while we're trying to get there, how do we help protect this community while we're trying to build infrastructure?
And can I add on to that question?
Sure.
Also, what does the state do to protect the individuals who live in those impoverished area in equal opportunity housing? Because if I stay in, my neighborhood is called Christopher Crossings, and it's an equal opportunity houser who houses the majority of the students that go to Christopher Newport News University, but I go to Hampton University. How does the state protect us from, like, because a simple solution to this is recycling bins. I called the city of Newport News to find out where is the closest recycling bin to my neighborhood, because my neighborhood does not offer recycling bins. Recycling is the one thing that can prevent the backup of the sewage drainage system in Newport News and in Hampton Roads in the whole 757 region. So what does the state require for recycling bins? Because when I drive across the street from Warwick Boulevard on the side streets going to Cedar Lane, all of those houses have recycling bins in their sewage plan. But in the apartments across the street, we do not have recycling bins. So the closest one to me is at the fire station that is 3 miles from my house. But I would like to know, why do I not have access to a recycling bin inside of my community to even protect myself and my neighbors from that?
Yeah. All right. So when we talk about flooding, it exacerbates all sorts of inequities, right? And all those problems. So trash pickup and all those things get worse. And I have to give you an answer that is not incredibly helpful, which is to say, not all those things are the state's control or function, right? So those things specifically are not. And I wish I could help you or get you in touch with someone who does, but on that specific thing, I just don't have the right answer for you because it's not the thing I do. But I hear you, and it stinks. But
you might be able to petition the city to bring in more localized recycling, a recycling center in that particular area that you live in. I mean, some apartment complexes are private, so it becomes an issue of who actually picks up the trash and whether they would provide that kind of service in an apartment. But the city may go to a certain designated spot and say, for non-residential, or in your case, an apartment, you might have to get an extra help from the city to do something with recycling. You're on the right track. That's an awesome track because I see it all the time, and it costs the city a lot of money to do stormwater cleaning, and they have to go before the major storms. They have to go and clean all the drains with vacuum trucks. So if we can get the trash off the street, if we can get trash where it belongs, you're on the right track. Well done.
And they really have a lot of resources to be able to come out. I would urge you to call because they come out and actually want to do if a citizen wants to do a recycling event, they will supply you with the different supplies and help with that. So it really is worth calling.
trash aside, if the community you just described is dealing with flooding issues, right? If it is a place that is flooding regularly and should have more done to protect it from flooding, right? If there needs to be something built or a culvert widened or something, that's the kind of thing we want to make sure is captured on our maps, in our planning, because let's be honest, it hasn't been in the past. And as other states have done master plans, they haven't necessarily done a good job at that. So what we can do, we want to do.
I just did want to mention briefly, this RGGI fund that we're talking about is something that other states had long before Virginia. And it's something that our current General Assembly was able to put into place, which is why we have these funds. And it's something that environmental groups had been pressing for a number of years. So it's something we can really be thankful for that our General Assembly was able to put in place here in the state of Virginia. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that I did talk to the city manager several months ago about this fund. So she is aware of this and hopefully has been working to look at programs that we would qualify for here in the city of Newport News.
And I would just say to that, we are, I think now it's the 12th or 13th state to join RGGI. Most states, they put all the money back into reducing carbon. We're one of the few states that took a really significant amount and put it towards flooding. And that is thanks to the General Assembly. That makes Virginia unique. I think a testament to our General Assembly and the governor that they realized how big of a problem these flooding issues are for us. Sure.
swell and building natural landscapes to provide better water absorption and shade to help with extreme.
Yes, absolutely. The question was, can the Community Flood Preparedness Fund or a project listed in the master plan encourage types of green infrastructure like swales and settlement basins and other things that are going to not only help reduce flooding, but also reduce urban heat islands, perhaps give some recreation space, other things that we need in urban areas. Absolutely. Those are some of our favorite projects to fund. Those are some of the projects that score the highest and get the best types of matches. So you come up with them, we'd love to pay for them.
Something formula you use for matching, say if I got $16, what would my matching be? But that's talking about looking at working with authority, socioeconomic areas. Is there some consideration that the match is large because sometimes that they are particularly money with them. So would that be, well, I would like to put that on the table for consideration, if it's not already.
We're already there. We got you.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
So let me tell you a few things. So first off, that address, this website right here, you can go here and get all sorts of information, including a link to the webpage for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which is on the Department of Conservation and Recreation's website, DCR. And you can look at the grant manual that people fill out when they apply for these, and you can see for low-income communities, the best match is the community would have to put in 5% of the total for capacity building. 95% from the state, 5% from the community. There can be in kind, can be all sorts of things. Can also use other grants, not like you can't match one of our grants against one of our grants, but you could get a HUD grant and match it against a community flood preparedness grant or something like that.
Oh, good, because that's a great consideration, because I know sometimes you just can't even apply for the grant if they want so much money.
So we took that into account, and let me say one more thing, which is we like to say at all these meetings is if you still can't get there, if the match is still problematic, please don't stop. Pick up the phone and call us. Call the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Let's talk it through. Let's figure it out. Right? We want to make this work. We're creating a big grant program from whole cloth. So we just need to talk everything through. Don't assume anything at this point. Yep.
We're really talking about a lot of bricks and mortar problems or solutions, I should say, to fix the problems. But public education is still needed, and it's still a key in dealing with any of these issues. Will that be a component of any of the planning or any of the resources that are being made available or the grant funding to actually address that?
We will try our best, but changing public opinion is hard. Nonetheless, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, as I showed you before, has 3 types of grants you can apply for. And under capacity building, you certainly can get money for community engagement, for outreach, and for things like that. Also, in the master plan, we're trying to raise attention just by having a plan. Hey, what's that? Why are they doing that? Well, because of all this flooding. 2, as we continue to grow the plan, if we will, one of the things that will be highlighted in the first iteration of the plan is not just where the flooding is and where we have great projects, But where the flooding is and where we don't have projects, where we don't know what to do, or where we just haven't thought that far in advance, or 5 years ago it didn't flood here, so we didn't have to think about it. But now, oh my goodness, we really need to start to think about it. So it'll identify those gaps, and that'll then give people more to work with. So I can't promise you, a silver bullet, but how's that?
But Matt, to that point, can a group like, say, HR PAC or other group apply for funding to assist the Commonwealth with that sort of educational process where they have those relationships and they can be leveraged? They just need the funding to get it done. Is that a possibility, to partner with local organizations, NGOs, that sort of thing, to assist with that communications effort?
So when we developed this fund, we wanted to keep the list of people who can get the money tight, because we want to make sure the money hits on the ground and goes to the communities that need it and actually does projects. So earlier on, I rattled off for you the 4 eligible entities to apply for this money. A locality or a PDC, should they wish to partner with those types of groups, with a nonprofit, with others, or subcontract with them for a grant, that is fine. But the applicants have to be one of those 4 groups, because we want the money to go to the community. And I'll leave it there.
You put that slide back up
Which,
with the entities, the groups that are eligible.
oh, that wasn't a slide, sorry, but I can just say it for you again.
Okay.
I may have messed up something. The eligible groups are planning district commissions, localities, Virginia Indian tribes recognized by the federal government, and soil and water conservation districts.
Yes, Josh, we have
Yes.
identified the physical flooding areas. Now, the flow of the water and the pockets of water miles where the problem sits. Will these funds be able to be moved to where the problem is, or we want to build more water management system pond to hold the water in there where the flooding areas are? Or we want to look, study the flow of the water, the blockage, until it get back to sea and out of Newport News.
So hydrology, right, studying the water, is incredibly important and always changing. And every time we do something, we change it again. Build a new parking lot, tear up a parking lot, build a highway, raise a road. Yep. We haven't done a great job as a country of talking to each other, right? Our friends in Virginia Beach and Norfolk have designed all sorts of floodgates and things. Unclear exactly, and I'm not saying it will, but unclear what it does to other localities, right? We have to do a better job. And one, that's why the state's getting involved, and the state is doing more to set up standards for how we develop, and we're encouraging communities to do things like that. So yes, we're going to look at those things as best we can. And our plan is going to change and iterate over time, right? So every few years, we're going to have to update this, because we may have solved one problem and then plug in a dam, right? We're going to solve this, and then it's going to start flooding over there. We're going to go deal with that. Our work may never be done. We're always going to have to be doing this. That's part of what the state is trying to set up is a permanent thing. I want to make one other point, though, about what you said, which is, are we going to chase it upstream, or are we going to kind of keep things how they are? And a painful truth is we're not going to be able to keep things exactly how they are for every place. And trying to figure out what that looks like, because we need to do it slowly and carefully and bring everybody along, is going to be hard. And that's the effort we're trying to do. That's what we're starting now with these conversations. 40 years, if we're lucky. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? And then I'm gonna ask you to draw on the maps. I think I got 2 more.
This is ground zero plus plus. And I want to what you brought up.
Okay. We're ground zero. Now I'm in Upper Denby, but this is hometown for me too. I worry about the residents that can't afford flood insurance because it's not just here. It could be, I live at the end of my street actually has a creek that flows into the James River, and that creek is 13 feet above sea level. My elevation is at somewhere close to 17 for my residents. But the people that live along that creek have already flooded. And now they were assigned a number of years ago into the FEMA's new flood maps. So they have to buy flood insurance, even though they're 13 feet above sea level. Same, but down here, it's much, much worse. And as we increase we're assuming global warming, I'm gonna say global warming because I believe in it. 40 years from now, this will be probably the edge of the Chesapeake Bay. Literally. And if we're not, we're within a block of it. Whereas now it's literally a quarter mile to the southwest of us. The same thing happens in Hampton throughout this whole area. I'm on the emergency management. I was here for Isabel working for Hampton in the state as emergency management. And I worried about a worst case scenario where we have a storm where it's going to be a wind event, but it's also going to be a rain event. And the wind event generates a tidal surge. With a tidal surge, it overruns the land, and then your rain event, which exacerbates and creates additional flooding. We didn't see the issues where we would have had people that couldn't leave their area. But yet we have to go in afterwards, and they're waiting out. They're waiting out of areas that are now flooded, and there's nowhere the water to go. We did not see that in Isabel. That was a wind event with an 8-hour tidal surge. We didn't have multiple tidal events because we had rain. These storms can be 1,000 miles across, and they dump rain to the western end of the state over the mountains. 2 days later, that floodwater's here, and if you have these elevated floods, this area remains flooded. What happens to the people? How do we get them out? How did we plan to have places for people to go, which we didn't have in Isabel? And then we have the residents that live here that have their homes and their property. How do we protect them or get the insurance that they need, considering the democratic income levels for the area? I've been thinking about this ever since Isabel. That's why I'm here tonight.
We're here because, like he put up about the 40 years, this is the time to be thinking, to be meeting across your community, to find some of the scientific experts that find what works in other. One of the things we do annually as a council, we go to the National League of Cities. And there we get to meet with people from different localities, different states that bring the best practices to the table. And you have people who are, and cities who are thinking of this, so everybody does not have to reinvent the wheel. They can just take from the other communities. So what I'm hoping is, with your concern, is that over the 40 years, we will, continue to meet, continue to find best practices and be able to model some of those things. Because you look at somewhere like Katrina, when they did the research, really it was the fact that they had so much old infrastructure for Katrina. That's why I'm thankful here in Newport News, we're getting grants from the stormwater people, the state and federal too, right, Sheila? And then to also see that we are really replacing some of that infrastructure that's been so old, particularly as we're looking at this lower socioeconomic area from 35th Street on down to as we're improving that, those improvements are going to help us. And I just really know that we just have to continue to meet and find solutions.
And now you know us, so you got to figure it out. You can give us a call. We're gonna ask this. We're gonna give this gentleman the final words, and then we're gonna just hang out and chat. If people want to talk some more, we'll let our friends online go, and we'll if you want to help us identify any flood areas on our maps, we'll ask you to do that.
I just wanted to mention, we were mentioning hydrology a few minutes ago. I wanted to give a shout out to Newport News Engineering, being on the HRPDC and the Coastal Resiliency Subcommittee. About a year ago, Newport News Engineering did a briefing for other Tidewater communities. And the reason we did that was because here in Newport News, we are far ahead on our hydrology studies of understanding how water in one area impacts water in other areas. It's one of the things that's led to some of the replacement that we've been doing throughout the city to improve our stormwater drainage. And it's a good time to be in Newport News, and I'm glad that we can lead this area in this important study.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end it. So thank you all so much for coming out. And we will be happy to stick around and chat if y'all want. And again, there's plenty of cookies and things, so make sure you
and
get
lots
some.
of materials outside to take back to your neighbors and your constituents. So please take the materials outside as well.
Thank you all so much. Have a nice night.